I'm in the Gospel of John, and I'm in chapter 13. Made it to the Gospel of John, chapter 13. I'll be in verses 1, probably make it down to verse 19, just to give you an idea about the distance in terms of where I expect to go in this message. Now, what's happening is that we have the Feast of Passover. That's what has happened, is that we now have the Feast of Passover. The Feast of Passover happens, or the Festival of Passover happens on the 14th day of the first month of the Hebrew calendar. All right, and this day was calculated. It was calculated according to the harvest of the barley. Now today, if you look at your calendars, you'll see on your calendar it says Passover, and that's a different system. That's a different computational system that the rabbis invented later on. But at this time in history, it was established according to when the barley was ready to be harvested within proximity of Jerusalem. What they would do is the priests would go out to the fields, collect some of the barley, and then they would parch it with fire. And once it was heated up with fire, if it evaporated and there was really nothing left, then it wasn't ready to be harvested. But if it didn't just evaporate, but there was grain that remained, then they would say it was ready to be harvested. Now, they would also keep track of when the most recent full moon took place. So on the day that they determined that the barley was ready to be harvested, they would check backwards and see when was the most recent full moon. And then they would count forward from the most recent full moon. And if it was before 10 days of the most recent full moon, it could be the 10th day of the month. If it was the 10th day of the month or earlier, then they would ignite signal fires and notify the entire nation of Israel that it was now officially declared to be the first month of the year of the Hebrew calendar. And on the 10th day of the month, the people were expected to select a Passover lamb. All right, so they would select a Passover lamb, and they would bring that lamb to Jerusalem to sacrifice it at the temple on the 14th day of the month. So that's what we have here. We have the 14th day of the month, and Jesus and his disciples will have sacrificed a lamb at the temple, and they are having the Passover meal. All right, now there's a lot of confusion presently when it comes to the Passover meal. I say there's a lot of confusion because there's something else called the Passover Seder. And this particular meal, the Passover Seder, is not the same as the one that Jesus was having with his disciples, which I know will be very upsetting for a lot of people to hear me say that. I understand, because there's a lot of time and effort and pride that has been invested into that particular subject with a lot of people, that there is this belief. There exists this belief that the Passover meal that Jesus was having with his disciples was the same as what people know as the Passover Seder, the Seder meal. And those are two different meals. The Passover Seder meal was a meal that happened 24 hours later on the 15th day of the month. That was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that was when they had the Passover Seder. Now, there are a lot of details related to this. For example, on the 15th day of the month, it was considered to be a Sabbath day, but it was a unique Sabbath day in the sense that you were permitted to buy and sell to obtain food, and you could prepare food. That was an exception for this Sabbath day, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which happened 24 hours after this Passover meal that Jesus is having with his disciples. And so because of that exception, the the Pharisees, they decided that, well, we're going to really enjoy that. We're going to buy and sell to obtain the food that we would like to get, and we are going to prepare food. And so they prepared a lot of food. But in the Passover Seder meal, or, I take that back. I'm not so sure that you could buy and sell to obtain food. I need to make that correction. I have to review the law. Unfortunately, I haven't reviewed the law since then, but I do know that you were able to prepare food. All right. So in preparing food, they would prepare a lot of food, and it would exclude lamb because they wanted to ensure that there was no lamb remaining from the meal from the previous evening. All right. And so it would be prepared without the Passover lamb. That was something that was important to them. But there was the establishment of the Passover Seder meal that was based on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, if you go through the Scriptures, you'll see in the other accounts, in the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you'll see that they were having a meal, and there were cups of wine, and there were things that seemed to parallel what would happen with the Passover Seder. But it's not exact. All right, it's not exact, and the reason why is because it wasn't exact. It was not the same meal that was taking place. All right, but as you go through the account, you'll find that there's occasions when this day was referred to as the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or it was referred to Passover. Those two words, those two phrases, were being used synonymously at this time in history because they were so close together. It's only separated by 24 hours, and so we'll just call it the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Yeah, we also mean the Passover. We'll call it the Passover. Yeah, we also mean the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so there is some use of those terms synonymously, and you'll only be able to really pick up on the difference if you've studied the Mosaic Law and you know what the laws are related to Passover and how they differ from the laws related to the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So what Jesus and his disciples are doing here is they're having the Passover meal. And the requirements related to the Passover meal are that you are to eat lamb that has been roasted by fire, you're to eat unleavened bread, and you're to eat bitter herbs. And you are to remember the Exodus from Egypt. That was it. Nothing more elaborate than that. Like I said, the elaborate meal and order, which is what Seder refers to, the order of how they're going to remember what had happened, and the ceremonies that are associated with that. All of that is associated with the Passover Seder, which was the celebration of the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which happened 24 hours later. And Jesus was in the grave during that meal. We don't know that the disciples had too much of a Passover Seder meal, but we do know we don't know that they had too much of a first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread Seder meal, but we know that they had the Passover meal with Jesus. All right, so a little bit of history there. And again, I know that, a lot of people have invested a lot into things like the Passover Seder, and we do the Seder. You can't understand the Scriptures, and you can't understand the ministry of Jesus unless you study and participate in the Passover. People say things like this. I don't agree. I don't think that they really understand too much, that they have not really studied the law very well, because they would be able to see the differences between the two. So that's just my opinion. A little, there's some people who I respect highly, and they don't agree with me, and that's fine. I would just hope that one day that they would look into it a little bit more and take that into consideration. But if not, it's fine. I don't think it's that important from my own point of view. All right, so beginning in chapter 13, verse 1. Now, before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. All right, so it's just a general way of saying that Jesus knew that this hour was going to come. He knew that he was going to die, that he was going to be captured and executed. He knew that this was going to happen. And he loved his disciples, and he loved them all the way to the end, all the way to the end. Which end? The end of his physical life, as he was living his life at this time until he was crucified. That was an end. It was also a new beginning, but it was a kind of end, and he loved them all the way through, all the way through to that end. Now, at the beginning of verse 1, it says, now before the feast of the Passover. But then if you look at verse 2, and supper being ended, all right? So this was a short amount of time, as is expressed here, before the Passover, and then, the supper's over now. The Passover's over. So the point of verse 1 mainly was just a matter of John wanting to emphasize that Jesus loved his disciples all the way to the end. All right, so in verse 2, and supper being ended, the devil, having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was and that he had come from God and was going to God, he rose from supper and he did something with that, which I will explain in just a moment. Let me go back up to verse 2, that the devil, having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that, all right, now what we have here is we have the description, or a description, that the devil, had put it into the heart of Judas to betray Jesus. That's something that John wants you to see. Before Jesus goes and washes everybody's feet, he wants to make it clear that Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him. Judas knew that he was going to betray him. The devil had put it into his heart. What would that mean to say that the devil had put it into his heart? What would that really mean? Does that mean that Judas could just say, well, I don't know what happened. The devil made me do it. Is that? No, I don't think that's what's going on here. All right, to put it into his heart is a way of saying he just put it into his mind. He participated. He found a way to communicate to Judas that this is something that Judas ought to do, that he ought to betray Jesus. All right? Now, the first thing that people will usually think of when they see something like this is they'll think, I guess Judas was the kind of person that was inspired by the idea of causing harm to Jesus. That he's just that kind of a person. The thought just came to me. I can hurt somebody. I'm going to hurt Jesus. And because I'm the kind of person who likes to hurt people, that maybe here's just a new opportunity. There is a chance, there's an opportunity, there is a way that I can hurt Jesus, through betraying him. And because I just enjoy doing that to people, here's my chance. And so in that way, the devil put it into his heart, and he decided to respond, and that's what he decided to do. I can understand that some people could have that first impression, because there are people like that. There just are. There are people who just find their lives to be boring. They just do. They find their lives to be boring. It could be because they don't really have to work for a living. It could be the case. And they're bored. They don't know what to do with themselves, or they know that those things that they fill their day up with just isn't significant anyway. They just might be the kind of person who's heavily stimulated by conflict and by the reactions of other people by causing harm to them. And so to them, this is a form of stimulation, recreation. Here's a good word, fun. It's actually fun to cause harm to other people through betrayal and, or whatever other mechanism that they may find a way to do because they can get away with it, that this is just who they are. And you might have people in your life like that, or you may have heard of people who are like that. And those are just, those are genuinely people who have actually made a decision that they really want to be evil. They are just pure evil, and no matter how they might cover that up and gloss that up, they are. And, eventually it just gets exposed. You usually just have to wait a while and people figure it out, and these people just become quite isolated after a while. But you might think that because that there are people like that maybe Judas was like this. I don't see that. Honestly, I really don't see that from the limited amount of information that's available for Judas. I would not take that as being my first choice. I wouldn't expect that to be the case for Judas. Maybe it was, of course, I will allow for that. But on the other hand, there is another way that the devil could have put this into his heart. And I find this way to be more common, all right? And what this way is that the devil expresses to Judas that this is a good thing, This is a good thing. It's not an evil thing, and you can get away with it, so let's cause harm. Let's just hurt people, Let's just do that. It's not like that. Instead, it's about, there are some good things that can result from this. A simple way that people will recognize this is to say that the ends can justify the means. What the end is, or what will result from this, can be good, and so let's do it, because we'll get a positive ending as a result of this. And then those people who have been betrayed, those people who have been hurt, well, they'll be thankful. They'll be thankful in the long run because of all the good things that may occur. This is more likely, in my opinion, this is more likely that Judas was inspired to betray Jesus because it was put into his heart, it was put into his mind. He came up with the idea, however you would want to describe this, that the end result of this is going to be good, and, Jesus is going to be thankful. He's going to appreciate the betrayal, the harm that was caused, that was done. He'll get over it, and he'll be thankful for it later, that kind of a thing. That the idea of doing something for the purpose of good, or some people will say for a higher purpose, kind of thing, as if that higher purpose, of course, is good from their point of view. I find this to be more common, that in general, people will do what they think is right, okay? And even if they know full well that what they are doing is wrong, as long as they can come up with some fantasy, which is the correct word, if they can come up with some fantasy of how it could be described as some kind of a good thing, how it can be described as the right thing, this fantasy that they invent in their mind, and they even know, that it's pure fantasy, but for them it's fun to come up with these fantasies, and that's how people will often pursue this kind of behavior, like Judas, who betrayed Jesus. All right, that it is a pursuit of good more than a pursuit of evil. However, there still is a pursuit of evil, and they know it. All right, but they justify it with an attitude of, this is good, or this is right, or this is justified. Maybe Jesus owed Judas something from his point of view. You owe me. People get some really, really bizarre ideas often, and I've had plenty of exposure to this in my life as well. So the betrayal is not necessarily just on the basis of the pursuit of evil, but can also be based on the pursuit of good. All right, that is a trademark or a way of recognizing the work of the devil, because the devil is interested in that which is good and evil. All right, the knowledge of good and evil. Try to recall what happened with Adam and Eve. Did the devil go to Adam and Eve and say, hey, the Lord said that this is a tree that you shouldn't be eating, but let's just do what's evil. Let's just do what's wrong. Hey, here's he's not around. You can get away with it, and then we can just engage in evil. That's not what he said. He said that there is something good that will result from this. All right? That you will know what is good and evil, and you will be like God. That's how it's advertised. That's what the devil does. That's how the devil manipulates people. That is how the devil invades people's lives. That's how people make decisions and how they get influenced and how they get manipulated by the devil. The devil says, this can be good. This is a good thing. This is righteous. This is right, or it's close enough kind of thing. All right? You can be like God. It's a lie, but they believe that this could be good, so they did that which was evil. And of course, that was definitely not the right thing for them to do. But that's what happened. So what could it be? And what could it be that motivated Judas to betray Jesus? Well, for me, I have my own point of view of this. From my point of view, what Judas wanted was he wanted Jesus to be the messianic king that the Jews were expecting. That he wanted Jesus to engage in a conflict with the Romans, engage in war, win the war, and establish the Davidic kingdom and rule there from Jerusalem over the entire nation of Israel. That was the predominant view of the Messiah. That was the main view. That's what most people believed about the Messiah that he would accomplish. And it did not appear that that's what Jesus was going to do. He came in during the triumphal entry a few chapters earlier, and now we're here. It's been a few days. The 10th day of the month, he arrived. Here's the 14th day of the month when they're having the Passover meal. I could just see Judas thinking, it's been 4 days. He's had plenty of time. He had the whole country, taking their clothes off and throwing them on the ground for him to have a path to walk, and they were ripping branches off the trees so they can wave them around. There is clearly a lot of excitement about the idea. So maybe Jesus just needs a little bit more inspiration. Maybe he needs to be pushed into a corner that the only way he can get out of this corner is if he fights. Maybe that's what it takes. And so Judas betrayed Jesus to the religious leaders, knowing that there would be a conflict. All right, and sure enough, that's what will happen. We'll look at this a little bit later. You'll see that sure enough, the Romans come to arrest Jesus. And here's the moment, right? Here's the opportunity. Jesus even speaks a word and they all hit the ground, Clearly this is good. This is a good scenario that Judas, he's the one who manipulated people to get to this point, And so here's the time when Jesus, because, obviously he's not going to let them just take him and crucify him, right? Obviously, well, that's exactly what he did, but the thought could very well have been that Jesus is going to fight back. And when he does, hey, you got war. That probably will be very short-lived, and Jesus will be the king. He'll be the king. He'll be the one. All right? This is an example of how the devil could put something into the heart of Judas, whose heart is in this direction, who wants to see this happen. This is not a bad thing, in that sense. If it was to be that Jesus would reign there in Jerusalem and establish the Messianic kingdom in that sense, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. All right, but this is how the devil works in a lot of people's lives. Like I said, there are some people that are just downright evil, and they really need to go to hell. They do. But there are others, they don't necessarily have bad intentions. They kind of want something good to happen, something good to result for a result, and they do believe that the ends will justify the means, But unfortunately for Judas, what happens is that Judas won. Judas won. He betrayed Jesus, and Jesus got betrayed. There you go. All right. So Judas did perhaps coordinate the circumstances such that Jesus could fight back and break out of it. But, Judas won. Jesus got arrested. Now, looking at the behavior of Judas afterwards, to me, his behavior afterwards indicates that that's not really what he wanted, that he didn't really want to win. Okay? He wanted Jesus to win. But, Judas won this particular conflict. And so his behavior of committing suicide, in my opinion, there's a lot more that could be said about this particular topic, but I'm gonna leave it here and just say that the idea of betraying Jesus may have been motivated out of a desire to do good and not necessarily a desire to do evil. All right, now what happens? So what happens? Let's go to verse 4. In verse 4, Jesus rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. All right? And Judas, the one who would betray him, was one of them. Judas knew that he was going to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him, and he washed his feet. Okay? He knew. He was willing to have someone in his life who could very well betray him. He was willing to do that. All right? And things unfolded in that way. They didn't have to unfold in that way, I suppose, but they did. And this was a part of the ministry of Jesus, and Jesus did use it to his advantage in the end. And so in the end, Jesus did win the conflict of this betrayal in the end. It did work out very well. However, in the transitions of things, there was the appearance that Judas won because Jesus was arrested and crucified. All right. Now, this relationship between Jesus and Judas was such that Jesus was still willing to allow Judas to have a place in his ministry, to allow him to have a part of what he was doing. It was to that extent. So Judas is there, and Jesus washes his feet, and there's no difference in the way that Jesus relates to him as he relates to any of the others. But then Jesus came to Peter, right? Verse 6, this is John chapter 13, verse 6. Then he came to Simon Peter And Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? He said to him, it's written here as if it's a question, but it looks more like a statement. Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Okay, so Jesus approaches Peter. He does. After he's washed some other guys' feet, right? He's approaching, here he comes. And Peter says, are you thinking you're going to wash my feet, huh? Is that what you're thinking? Okay. And Jesus says, you don't understand what I'm doing, but you'll understand afterwards. Okay? You'll understand. I know you don't understand. You don't understand this, Peter. You don't get it, but don't worry, all right? You'll understand afterwards. Will you wait until afterwards? Let me do this, and then you will understand. How does that sound? Right? Can you do that? Well, let's see. Go to the next verse. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Well, sure enough, he doesn't understand. Jesus said, you're not going to understand what I'm doing. He says, well, you will never wash my feet. That's Peter's way of confirming what Jesus just said. All right? It's not the other way around. It's not like Jesus was approaching Peter and Peter said, now stop right there. You are never going to wash my feet. And then Jesus replies with, listen, you're not going to understand this right now, but you'll understand it later. You'll understand it afterwards. That's reverse, okay? That's not what happened. Jesus initiated. He says, you're not going to understand this. You'll understand later. And Peter says, no, we're not even going to, no, we won't, we're not going to even go there. We're not going to deal with that. You will never wash my feet. All right, so Jesus is going to have to take a different approach if he's going to do this. He takes a different, so what is the approach he takes next? First, he tries to reason with him, right? He says, look, I'm going to reason with you. You don't understand this. We can reason that. We can agree on that. You'll understand later. Just, have some patience. Give me a chance. You'll understand. Trying to be reasonable. He's trying to reason with him. No, that's not working. Okay, threaten him. All right, try that one. Maybe he'll be responsive to a threat. Okay, so he threatens him. That's verse, we're in verse 8. In verse 8, Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. So Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. All right, that's a threat. If I don't wash your feet, you have no part with me. That's it. We are done. Okay, so Peter was a little bit more responsive to that. Verse 9, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. All right, so he was responsive to that. Okay, he'll respond to that. That's unfortunate. It's not a good way to have a relationship with someone such that you have to threaten them in order to have the right outcome. That's not really the best way to go. But that's what Jesus applied here. So in verse 10, Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And if you are clean, and you are clean. I'm sorry, I got the commas in the wrong place. Let me repeat this again. Verse 10, Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you, for he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, you are not all clean. All right, now there is a combination of direct and abstract communication going on here. A combination of the two. You got some direct communication, and you have some abstract things being conveyed all at the same time. All right, now, first of all, he's already bathed in a sense, which wouldn't be too much of a surprise, as they're having the Passover meal and they wash themselves off prior to that. That wouldn't be unusual at all. And yet, in the environment that they were in, especially in the time of history, it would not, be unrealistic for their feet to get a little dirty as they're going from one place to the other, one room to the other, that sort of thing. In the environment, in the place that they were in, it's not too unusual at all that they could be bathed, and yet it's easy for their feet to get a little dusty. And so here's an opportunity to just wash your feet off, and there you go. This was a common part of daily life. Nothing unusual about that at all. And so Jesus is just simply expressing to him, look, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, in the sense that he probably has already bathed recently, and his feet just got a little dirty, which is normal in that kind of a environment, in that time in history. So let's just wash the feet off, and then everything's fine. You are completely clean. And you are clean. And then he speaks abstractly, and you are clean, and yet not all of you. But he gives the explanation. John gives the explanation of what Jesus meant by that. He meant that in the sense that there was Judas who was going to betray him. And so when Jesus used that phrase associated with being clean, he mentioned, well, not all of you are, because one of you is going to betray me. And no matter, how you might justify that or think that that's a good thing, it's still a betrayal, and it's still uncleanness. No matter, however you want to package it, that's the way things really are. And so Jesus uses this phrase to speak abstractly about Judas. All right? That he would be considered to be unclean in their group. All right? And, Jesus washed Judas's feet. All right? He washed his feet, and he was still recognized as being unclean. Not because he didn't get his feet washed, but because he was going to betray Jesus. So there is a disconnect, all right? This is not the same thing to say that as long as we have foot washing going on, then we have a fulfillment of something, or everybody's clean. That has nothing to do with it at all. There's a disconnect between the foot washing and the reasons by which Judas was declared to be unclean in their community. It was because of his intent to betray Jesus. All right, now that is what Jesus said. This is what he communicated. All right, and he did this in order to show them something else. And I'll explain that next. The something else. Jesus explains what this is all about. Unfortunately, we are surrounded by people who have a different point of view. All right? That people have a different idea about what this means. For example, there are some people who believe that, this is what Jesus did with his disciples, and we'll see in just a moment that he even said that he wanted them to do this with each other. I've done this in order to suggest that you do this with each other. And so because of this experience, supposedly, now we have a new ordinance, a new sacrament, a new ceremony that we need to include within our churches, within our fellowships, that we have to have foot washing going on in our congregations. Okay? I don't see that happening here at all. I don't, but there are people who do, that's their point of view, that they think that the reason for this was so that Jesus could show us that he wants us to wash each other's feet today with basins and water in our communities and in our congregations. All right, now listen, if you want to do that, I don't want to say that there's something evil about that or that that's a bad thing. I don't have anything to say about that at all. If people want to do that, they feel that that's good. You're not going to get any complaint from me. I'm certainly not going to protest that. But what I will say is that that is definitely not what Jesus intended when he was doing this with his disciples. That's not what he was intending, was so that we would establish a new ordinance of this kind. If a person, if a group of people want to have an ordinance of this kind, again, I'm not going to say that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that this is not what Jesus intended to establish. This is something that people have done on their own. Another common complication or misconception from my perspective that people have concerning this is that people want to say that this has something to do with forgiveness. All right? People just would like to say that this has something to do with forgiveness, that through this illustration, through this ceremony that Jesus engaged in, he did this so we could tell each other that we need to keep short accounts with God in order to maintain our forgiveness. All right, and the way that people will say this is they will say, well, the crucifixion of Jesus washed your whole body, but occasionally your feet get a little dirty, and so you need to do something in order to seek forgiveness from God. That's what a lot of people will get into. And people will say that it's similar to this, that just as Jesus washed their feet, even though they were completely clean, so also we need to have moments of confession. We need to have some ceremony of some kind. We got to have an altar call. We got to have something so that people can just kind of, ask for forgiveness for some of their sins. All right. Now it's my sincere belief that what Jesus did had nothing to do with that at all. All right. And that this point of view is total and absolute fantasy. Okay? It's just complete fantasy to suggest that forgiveness can be found, the topic of forgiveness can be found here at all. All right? I just don't see it here in any way whatsoever. And I know that this is going to be upsetting to a lot of people who may likely hear this. And, if it upsets you, I just want you to know that's not my intent, okay? If it does, it does, but that's not my purpose, because I know for a lot of people, this is a big deal. This is important. Now listen, I'll say this. If you want to have something to look at in the scriptures that gives you some way of feeling like it's okay to be obtaining forgiveness outside of what Jesus already did for you, if you want to find something else that may inspire people to participate in some ceremonial short account with God or whatever, then, I can understand that this may be important to you. I would just say, look somewhere else. Not here in John chapter 13. Go somewhere else. Go find some other passages somewhere. I don't think any exist, but just go somewhere else, because that's not what's happening here. That is not what this is about at all. Okay, it just doesn't have any relationship to that whatsoever, although I know, that this is important to a lot of people. They've invested a lot of effort into this. They've invested a lot of sermons into this. People are known for already saying this, for already believing this, and they don't want to admit that maybe they were wrong. That is unacceptable, to admit that maybe you were wrong. And that is like the ultimate evil of the universe for some people, to admit that they were wrong. That's just beyond unacceptable for some folks. And, people like that, they ought to just go to hell. Fine. They won't even, they want to live in absolute denial of reality to that extent. Good for them. But The relationship that God wants to have with us is based on reality, not on these fantasies that people want to live in. You want to do that, you're going to do it by yourself. All right? You may think that God is with you, but he's not. It just isn't in that at all. All right? So I needed to mention that because this is common. It's very common that people want to hold to this position. I just don't see it. All right, so he goes on and he does give an explanation. Okay, let me go back to verse 10. Jesus said to him, "He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean." All right, and to me, that's just a practical statement with regards to the fact that his feet probably just got a little dirty walking around, And you are clean, but not all of you. Now, he washed Judas's feet, and he still says, even though he washed Judas's feet, he's still unclean, because the uncleanness that he refers to abstractly, spiritually speaking, is one of betrayal, for he knew who would betray him. Therefore, he said, you are not all clean. Going on into verse 12, so when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Okay, pause there for just a moment. Now, that doesn't mean that they are required to, that he has established a new ordinance for them, that he's given them a commandment. And so, now today in our churches, we need to be washing each other's feet just like that. That's not what he's saying. Okay, I know that there are some people who would like to believe that that's what he's saying. And if you want to do that, I'm not going to protest. But I am going to protest what you think Jesus was communicating. That I will protest. I don't think that's what he has in mind. He goes on, and he gives a better explanation, more details about what he means by this. Okay, that you also ought to wash one another's feet. He gives a better explanation. He doesn't say that you are required to, or you will not have a place in the kingdom of heaven, that kind of thing. Verse 15, for I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. An example, all right? But what is the example that they should do? Keep reading. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Okay, now what he's saying is that the servant is not less than his master, is not greater than his master, and that if they are going to have a relationship with each other, such that on occasion one of them is going to be relating in a leadership role of some kind with them or with others, with each other, that we are to relate to each other with a sense of humility, to the extent that we would wash each other's feet. That is an expression of humility, and it defines the relationship in a way of there being a clear understanding that this is not about who's going to be greater and who's going to be lesser. It's just not about that. It's about the fact that we are living our lives together and that we are participants in the work of God, that we are participants in the creation of life, and that there shouldn't be any distinct opportunity for pride between one another that would get in the way of accomplishing the tasks and the purposes that our God has given for us to be engaged in. All right? That's what I see here. I see Jesus saying this, doing this, to give an example in order to show them how they should relate to each other. All right? It's not about washing each other's feet. Not about that at all. It's about relating to one another. what is the relationship between people? What does that really look like? Is it a matter of there being someone who is greater or lesser? It's not. It's about remembering that there are tasks, that there is purpose. Okay? It's about remembering that there are things to be accomplished, and that it's not about who does or who doesn't. It's not about who is in charge or who isn't in charge. It doesn't matter who's greater or who's lesser, who's leading or who's following, who's master and who's servant. It doesn't matter. Those things don't matter. What matters is that we relate to each other in a way that we achieve the objectives and the goals of our God. That is what really matters. All right, so again, in verse 17, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled, he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he. So Jesus lets them know, I have told you of this betrayal in advance. You guys don't see it happening, but I do. So when you see it happening, you'll know that Jesus is God. You'll know that he knew. You'll know. You'll have an increase in trust towards Jesus, an increase in the knowledge of who he really is, and that is good. They need an increase in that regard. All right? So he does not speak concerning all, but he speaks concerning betrayal. All right? So in this context, the washing of each other's feet was about the idea of an understanding that we all have a common purpose, we have common objectives, we have common goals, and Jesus was in the leadership position. He was in the leadership position in the community of his disciples, such that he established the steps through which the goals would be achieved. And the disciples were expected to follow along those lines. But Judas went outside of those boundaries, and in going outside of those boundaries of Jesus having the leadership position, it was betrayal. All right? It was betrayal. If Judas would take the role of washing the feet of the disciples, if he would be a legitimate recipient of having his feet washed by Jesus, this could help Judas to see that they were all to cooperate together. Judas went outside of those boundaries. Okay? Betrayal of the people with whom you are working with is not the way of God. All right? That's not it. And so this is what this is about. And Jesus initiates with the foot washing to give them an opportunity to see and to understand. Now, this could be an opportunity for Judas. This could be an opportunity for Judas. Jesus washes his feet and is saying these things that Judas could easily pick up on. Judas could be thinking, he knows. He hasn't exposed me yet. He knows. He's not, we could get out of this. There's a way to unwind this. Judas didn't have to betray Jesus. He could have recognized that, look, this is the way things are. And it's not about whether or not Judas is going to have power and control to be able to manipulate the conflict that Jesus couldn't get out of without being killed. It is a power struggle in that sense, that Jesus does not want things to go that way. Judas decides, oh yes, things are going to go that way. There's a power struggle involved there. There was an opportunity through the foot washing that Jesus was saying to Judas, look, I'm washing your feet Don't you understand that we don't need to relate to each other on the basis of this kind of a power struggle? All right? You know that this is betrayal. Don't do it. Stick with me. You don't understand right now. You will understand later. It doesn't have to be this way. Okay? Those are the messages that Jesus could be conveying to Judas when washing his feet. And then saying it again and saying it again. There's someone who's going to betray me. So when it does happen, you're not all surprised. Even though I washed his feet to try to express the fact, look, we don't have to be in this kind of a situation. We don't have to relate to each other in this context. It doesn't have to be this way. There are better ways. There are other ways for these objectives to be met. But Judas, no, I'm going to betray you, and we're going to do it that way. Okay, fine. So be it. All right. So again, in verse 19, now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he. So at the end of this entire foot washing experience, at the end of this, what does he really want? He wants them to remember what happened. He wants them to remember the things that he said. And he wants them to remember and to see and to believe that he really is who he said he is. To trust in that more. To rely on that. To believe in that. To live their lives in accordance with that fundamental truth. That this is the objective. All right? This is the objective. That you may know that he is who he said he was. All right? That he really is this person. The objective is not, well, now are we all washing each other's feet? That's not the issue. That has nothing to do with this at all. It has to do with Jesus navigating through the conflict at hand and using this opportunity to convey truth to them that they may hopefully believe. All right, I got a question for you, for those of you who are using this for your small groups. If Jesus washed your feet, how would that change your perception of the relationship between you and him? Okay, you have a perception of the relationship between you and Jesus. You have a perception, you have a belief concerning what this relationship is and what this is about. Well, how might that change if this afternoon, or depending upon the time of day when you're viewing this, if, soon Jesus manifests before you and says, excuse me, but I'd like to take about 10 or 15 minutes and for us to just have some time together, and included within that, I like to wash your feet. If he did that for you, if he did that to you, how would that change your perception of the relationship that actually exists between you and your God? There's a lot of opportunity for conversation there because, we do have these ideas about what this relationship is and what this looks like, how we would like our God to relate to us, how we would like him to be in our lives, what role we would like him to have. But if he did that to you, how might that change or cause a disruption, in your view of God? How would this cause a disruption in that? And this is the kind of question that will cause some discomfort, all right? So it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a struggle. Have an understanding with those who you're talking with that it would be appropriate for them to wrestle with this, to struggle with this, and to deal with the discomfort of how this might change the way that they want to see Jesus, but he's not going to be seen that way so much if he washes their feet, all right? And I will continue into John chapter 13, verse 20 in the next message. Thanks.